Yes. Everyone, we apologize for the start, but as always, it's virtual meetings in Zoom or an adventure.
Well, you put up the solar opportunity in Texas, not the meeting agenda. That's it. The next one is the agenda.
Well, we do want to thank all of our sponsors that help us
Yes.
make these presentations and particularly put together the solar tour in October.
Can you maximize that? Whoever's got it. This is not the right one. Well, is that the one that Ryan did?
Yeah, that's the one Ryan did.
Okay.
But it's got April in there, and it also has.
Does it have Tracy?
He doesn't have the presentation.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and get started.
All right, we're in.
Good morning to everybody, and we apologize for the digital quirks we had this morning. Welcome. I see some new people that have joined us. Welcome. This is the monthly meeting of the North Texas Renewable Energy Group. And what I want to announce first today is that we have great news for the membership. You may remember that in December, we decided to solicit a community project for the membership to undertake. And at its annual board meeting, the board decided to select the City of Dallas's request for NTREG to help with implementing portions of the climate action plan that it has adopted. And in particular, the City of Dallas is looking for NTREG to help it define and create the criteria for selecting renewable energy hubs in the City of Dallas. So we are seeking 2 volunteers to help us. We need you. This is for your community project that we've undertaken, and it reflects on all of us. We need your energy, and we need your brains. So there is a MailChimp that went out earlier in the week. There'll be another one sent out for you to click and submit to volunteer. That request will be going to Mark Whitty, the coordinator of the events and volunteers for NTREG. And then the next big piece of news that we have for you is that NTREG is getting a $10,000 grant from its mothership, the Texas Solar Energy Society. And that came from a grant that it got from the Metals Foundation. But what we are being tasked to do for that $10,000 grant is to come up with an internship program that will select anywhere from 5 to 7 interns to work at solar energy companies in the North Texas area. Texas Solar Energy Society will be the one selecting the companies, but we are to come up with the internship program, vet and recruit the people who might be the interns, publicize it obviously, and select them based on the criteria that this group determines is good for working at a solar company. So I need at least 5 volunteers to help develop the program. We already have volunteers from the board, but I need 5 more to participate in developing the internship program. implementing it and carrying it out and reporting to Texas. And then I need at least five volunteers to be mentors to the students that get selected to be interns, because we need to have them have somebody to turn to that is knowledgeable in the industry. And in case something isn't going as well as they want it to go, or if they want to talk to somebody about how great it's going, we need to have volunteers, mentors for each of those internships. So we need five of those. We also need, so we need five mentors at least, and five to help with the creation and implementation of the program. We also have a need for volunteers for the DFW Solar Tour this year. The planning for the tour usually starts in April. We're running behind because of the storm in particular. And also this year, as opposed to last year, we think we're gonna have at least a part of the solar tour be in person. So we need at least 10 volunteers, because there's a lot more that goes on when you have in-person DFW solar tour as opposed to last year. I know Mark Whitty will tell you a little bit more about that, but I wanted to bring that to your attention, bring you the great news about what we're doing. The fact that we actually, we need you and we need your help. The last item that we need with respect to the grant that we're getting from Texas Solar Energy Society is that we need to help devise a program to increase and expand community solar in the North Texas area. So we need at least 3 volunteers for that as well. The deadlines were originally today, but go to the MailChimp, click on, we'll send out another one, and we'll keep the membership opportunities open until this coming Thursday, so that you have enough time to go volunteer and we can get meetings started and we can start carrying out our programs. But we cannot do it without you. We need your help. Please help us and volunteer. With that, Liz, are you still on? I know Lisa couldn't stay for our membership meeting, but I think she's still on. Mark, while Lisa, is she off? I thought I saw.
She's still here.
Mark Whitty, in the while Lisa comes back, do you mind giving the membership an update on your events?
Not at all. Thank you, Rosa. So 2 things I wanted to just make everyone aware of. We have updated and revised and hopefully improved the Solar 101 tour, and we're now calling it the Solar 101, not tour, presentation, the Solar 101 and Energy Efficiency 101 presentation. And we have a goal of making at least 1 outside presentation per month on average. Ideally, we'd like to do 1.5 per month on average, but we want to do 1 a month to outside groups so that we can get all this accumulated knowledge of this group out more in the general public, where it will benefit more people. So any ideas that y'all have to get us on speakers list, or if you know of individual organizations or groups of entities that would like a speaker, we are available and we have the presentation ready to go. So we can move forward just as soon as you can help us find some people to make the presentations too. Second thing I want to talk about is, as Rosa mentioned briefly earlier, is the solar tour for this year. We did send out a request for hosts and volunteers. Let me just put it diplomatically, we did not get enough response that we have all the hosts and all the volunteers we need. So we are going to pretty shortly send out another request for hosts and volunteers. We're also this year going to add some commercial / industrial sites. So it isn't just residential. It will have some sites there for business owners or business people to look at. And then we also want to add a community solar farm. Evidently, there is only one in the Metroplex, so I'll follow up with that company to see if we can get copies of videos they may have already made, and if not, we'll see if they can allow us to make a video of their facility. And our goal, our intent is to archive all these videos of the different homes, commercial sites, community solar farms, whatever, on the website so that they can be accessed at any point in time in the future for anyone that wants the information. And so again, we do need your help, and we would appreciate volunteers for all these different things we've got going on right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Lisa, are you still with us? Well, Lisa normally makes the announcement on the membership. I just want to remind people that Lisa has sent out some renewal notices for members, and they have not all been renewed. We can't do any of this without a little bit of money aside from your great support volunteering. So I would request that if you're joining this meeting and you're here for the first time and you like what you see, please become a member. The individual memberships are more than reasonable. They're $20 a year. And basically we use the monies to pay for our Zoom costs so that we can have these meetings. As we get going with hopefully in-person meetings again this fall, our monetary needs will increase because we do provide coffee at those meetings, and we do have to pay for the space that we use. So we would appreciate any support you can give us, any donation, or joining as a member would be even better. Thank you very much for that. And then usually in our programs, we have announcements by members. Does any member have an announcement about any action or activity that's going on that they wish to make known to the membership? If you do, please unmute yourself and speak up. Mark?
Rosa, I think Tracy Wallace had an announcement to make at the meeting.
She does. She's on the agenda, Mark. Yeah. But usually we generally have announcements by members so that if there's any meetings or anything like that going on, then people can be made aware. Anybody have any announcement to make on that score? How about our guests? Any guests have any announcements to make? Any meetings ongoing regarding renewables, solar, legislation relating to solar or renewables? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. I just want to let everybody know that one of the groups that we collaborate with is the Climate Reality Project, and they have their monthly meetings the third Saturday of the month from 1 to 3 p.m. So any of you who can attend, that would be fantastic. Ryan Clemens from our board is also involved with the Young Professionals in Energy, and we are still working to set up a meeting with them and us. Tracy, I think you're up.
I have updated the PowerPoint if James or somebody can give me the ability to share my screen.
I'll do that here shortly. Let me do that for you, Tracy. I'll make you co-host.
And while we're waiting, I just want to say that, you know, one site that we could consider as a commercial site for the DFW Solar Tour is a longstanding nonprofit in South Dallas Fair Park area. I helped them write a grant for Sun Club, and they were awarded, and that will begin, their construction will begin in the next 60 days. So Mark, you and I can, Mark Whitty, you and I can put our heads together also on any other apartment complexes, anything y'all want to consider in the southern sector. All right.
Great.
Thank you so much for the screen share. All right. Michael, can you let me know if you can see that?
We see it.
Awesome.
See it.
All right. Thank y'all so much for this opportunity to come back and give an update. As those of you who were here before, you know that 3 of us nonprofits are collaborating at this corner. This is where we will do our outdoor. Now we've transitioned out of the classroom into outdoors. It was our COVID pivot, and it's just taken a long time. Oak Cliff Veggie Project, which now has 7 community gardens in Oak Cliff and More Than a Roof, that does support work with neighbors and returning citizens. This is in, pardon me, 75216, that has the dubious honor of having the highest incarceration rate, food desert, employment desert, elevated school dropout rate, and low access to living wage work. And I just mean that people from the southern sector have to travel a lot further to get to living wage work than those north of 30. Our goal at this corner is to build resilience through education. And part of that will be our solar installation training. Our lead instructor happens to be my husband, Mark McCollum, has also created curriculums for journeymen who, you know, are electrical contractors but don't have experience in solar and want to do that class. And then we also have a lead class that will be coming up where that is somebody who's been an entry-level installer, been in the industry for maybe 6 months to a year and wants to become a lead. It's a layout class. We've had rain delays. Our contractor has a day job, big commercial construction, but he's doing this for us on the weekends, and we have had one rainy weekend after the other. During this time, we've also seen, after the big freeze, lumber prices have tripled from when we originally created our budget, and the fence prices have increased 28%. So that affects both our fencing and our construction of our mock rooftop. And I'll give you some exact, well, you see there on the construction delay, we need $2,700 more for that. The community garden has been installed, and we got, we've had plants donated by Restorative Farms, which is connected with Big Tech's Urban Farm, if you've ever seen that at the State Fair. And Kimley Horn, Emily Drake from Kimley Horn has made a beautiful design for pollinators and food to be grown, native plants, so that we can remove the lawn there and be using less water over time. We are excited that Black Girls Drone will be doing a summer camp here, and we have a drone pilot, that a female, no less, I love that, for this camp, located through Excel Geothermal, who did what you all may remember, or those of you who are new will see, they did a ton of work for us one day. We have energy efficiency education being planned for our neighbors with, I didn't ask his permission to say this, but Paul Westbrook, who is one of our members here at NTREG. And it sounds like I need to talk to Mark Whitty about that too, and coordinate our efforts on making a presentation in the southern sector. I will say, if you saw this slide before, you know we were asking Green Mountain Energy Sun Club to help us with these next few items, and they have turned us down. And that's because they wanted to see us have a much longer lease, like 10 to 20 years. And we don't have that. And this is going to be a problem in the southern sector. Anyway, so we will now have to go another route. There's, one door closes, another opens. And so we'll be looking for other routes. One of our graduates, Jean Boyd, designed these 4 standalone solar powered rainwater harvesting irrigation systems for us. That would be fantastic. It would just create the resilience of the community garden there. Once the foundation is repaired on the little house where we office, have our restrooms, and we'll use the kitchen during our training, we'll seek funding for solar on the little house. There's no electricity on the 3rd lot, which is our lot, 1311 Stella. And the solar lighting is $3,600 per light. The solar charging bench is $3,200. And then we await pricing from Hort Americas on a 20-foot hydroponic grow container. And then we would want to add solar to that. So it could also be sustainable and not reliant on the grid. Here is where you just see that huge tree line that was all grown into the fence. Excel Geothermal very kindly donated time, equipment, and manpower to get that cleared. And the city of Dallas gave us a roll-off container for free. These panels that Michael Fladmark did a job, and these panels had microfractures from the tornado, but they'll be perfect for practicing installation. We're practicing installation. It's not live. It's the physical process, learning the tools, all that kind of stuff at the entry-level class. And we're super grateful to Jason Moore of Quantum Solar, who's associated with Native in North Texas. And they've donated all the roofing material we need for the 20 by 20 rooftop. Super grateful to have been connected by the Regional Black Contractors Association with Lamarcus Howard, who you see here on the left. Anybody familiar with the Dallas County Elections Office that was rebuilt after 2015? He's the construction manager on that. And then Greg Bender, who is a custom home builder, and they've just been great professional resources for us. These are the photos of Oak Cliff Veggie Project doing the food distribution, which always happens the same day as a garden work day. And Climate Reality Project, we were just blown away. And one day they raised $1,050 to put towards our fence. We also had an anonymous donor connected with our board president who donated $3,000 for the fence. We just have $1,650 left to go on the fence. Sierra Club donated $250 for a container like you see here in plants, pollinator plants, which are, most of us who are in this world of renewable energy are also familiar with the need for pollinators. And so we've, it'll be both host and nectar plants. And this will also be with local children or just local residents. I mean, I'm not a kiddo and I love learning about this stuff. We'll do some education regarding pollinators, why we need bees and butterflies and hummingbirds, all that stuff. And then what they can plant that will save water and be beautiful. So here is part of the plan from Kimley Horn, a bird's eye view. Here is the church at 1301 Stella. Here's the little house at 1307 that More Than a Roof operates out of. Here's our container on 1311. The in-ground beds you see here, which are number 11 and 11, have been installed. And we have 10 of the 15 grow boxes. These are the little green squares you see here. Those have been donated by Restorative Farms. So the goal, again, will be to remove the lawn, replace with water-wise natives over time, and just a gorgeous design by Kimley Horn. Our funding started with $5,000 each during the North Texas CARES Fund when the pandemic hit, from United Way and Communities Foundation that purchased our container, the rock that it's based on, and most of the materials. It's the delays have, lumber prices have tripled. So that's been an issue for us. All right, our needs. Like I said, we have 1,650 left to go on fencing, 2,700 that has creeped up on us because of the increase in lumber prices on the construction. And then these other things will come later, right? After we have it built and we're ready to rock and roll. For our first outdoor training, 3,500 for many more tools than you see listed here. We will have groups of 5 trainees come through at a time. They will work on this inclined plane in safety equipment, so they know what it's like, how to get into it, how to work with the rope grab, when they get on the job. We want them familiar with tools and familiar with the physical process of installation when they get on the job. Already mentioned foundation on the little house, the solar lighting, and solar charging bench for the community. And that's it. And thank you so much for the opportunity to blow through, the update. Anybody got questions?
Tracy, there's a question on the chat on whether you've gotten pushback for the front yard gardens. And is it an edible landscape acceptable?
From the community? No. I mean, this has all just been an empty, barren, bleak lot. And what has happened is that the church across the street is now interested in participating at some level. They haven't decided what. So yeah, we'll continue communicating with the neighborhood, but right now it's just people are excited that something is happening here. I'm sorry, I haven't been following the chat as I've been going along.
Well, there was also a question of whether you've considered alternative materials to wood.
On the construction of the mock training rooftop, we have basically, because metal has also gone up. So we would have to, at this point, go back to the architect who did this design for us pro bono back in November, December timeframe, and have those materials reworked. And we have been working with Solar Energy International to basically recreate the design of their low-pitched mock training rooftop. It's about a 23-degree pitch. So, man, if somebody wanted to rework that materials list and design for free, I would be all open to it. So, anyhow, and our other needs as far as our nonprofit is, we need a treasurer. We need people to apply for committees. And we specifically have spent the last 3 years looking to increase women and people of color on our board. So those would be the other things I would just throw out there.
Terrific. There was also a question about whether this might be a project where a Scout Eagle might turn it into one of their adopted projects. So that's something maybe to look into. But what I wanted to say was that we're encouraging all the members and all the participants to donate whatever you can to Green Careers Dallas so that they can reach their goals. We are also doing this, aside from the fact that Green Careers Dallas is one of our collaborative partners and we support everything they do. The Climate Reality Project, one of our other collaborators, has thrown down the gauntlet and challenged us to raise at least as much money as they did, $1,050 to donate to Green Careers Dallas. So there's a gauntlet. I encourage everybody to donate, and let's help South Dallas reap some of the benefits of the renewable energy revolution. Thank you, Tracy, very much. Thank you. We appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank you.
I know we've had a little bit longer meeting than usual, but Joella, are you there?
I'm here, ready to.
Okay,
introduce-
terrific. April, welcome to our meeting. We are terribly excited about you agreeing to make this presentation to our membership. Everybody's very excited and looking forward to it. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to one of our program co-coordinators, Joella, to introduce you to the group. Welcome.
April Christensen has worked in project development for both wind and solar projects over the past 5 years at Invenergy. Her most recent development, Samson Solar, is located in Northeast Texas in Lamar, Red River, and Franklin County. Once built, Samson Solar will be the largest utility-scale solar project in the United States. Prior to her time at Invenergy, April spent time in the residential energy efficiency space, bringing programs to utilities across the Midwest. She has a Master's of Environmental Management with a focus in energy and the environment from Duke University. She obtained her Bachelor of Music in Piano Performance and her Bachelor of Arts in Biology from Hastings College. April is originally from Nebraska, where she grew up on her family's farm. She now lives in Denver, Colorado, where she enjoys hiking, cycling, and playing the piano. Welcome, April Christensen.
Thank you.
Let's
Is
give
anyone
April a round of applause.
Hey,
Thank you.
April, do you mind sharing your screen so we can see your presentation?
Absolutely.
And I do want to remind everybody, if you're not speaking, please mute your phone so that we minimize background noise and we can all hear April.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay, can you see my presentation?
We can, if you can, there you go.
Okay.
Thank you so much, April.
Absolutely. I'm glad we could get the technology working. Is there any bad feedback with my speaking, or are we okay?
There's a little bit of
Just a little
scratching in the
bit.
background, but I think you should go ahead and go forward.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you guys for having me. I don't know if anybody else feels slightly weird when someone reads their bio while they're sitting there, but it was great to be able to speak with you guys today. You heard a bit about my background. I've been working in this role in project development for the past 5 years with Invenergy. It is interesting. I've switched a little bit. It sounds like a lot of what your group is familiar with is you do a lot on the residential side, at least from what I can gather. And then like the commercial scale. I used to be in that realm a little more with residential energy efficiency, but then I've shifted more into the utility scale space. And so a bit different. How many of your members are in Dallas versus the other rural areas? Does anyone have a kind of a breakdown? I'm just curious.
We don't necessarily have a breakdown on a percentage basis. We do as far as around the Metroplex, but most of our members are in the Metroplex. I actually live in a rural community that's served by both a co-op and the Encore deregulated market.
In April, I can't give you that either, but the last time we checked, we had members from over 87 zip codes in the area.
Okay, very cool. So I just was curious how much of the Northeast you guys cover. So, well, I wanted to just talk a bit about the project I've been working on, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the general project development process. Some of this will be about who Invenergy is. It'll help kind of set the table for how we approach utility scale. And then we'll open it up for questions. I don't have a ton of slides because I really wanted to see what you guys are most interested in talking about today. So for Invenergy's background, one, kudos to Joella for being able to say Invenergy. A lot of people have a hard time pronouncing the name of our company, but it is based on innovation in energy. We are the world's leading privately held sustainable energy company. We do a couple different technologies. Wind was one of our first really big investments in our resources. We did start in natural gas, so we have a few natural gas plants across the country. And solar has become a growing part of our portfolio, and with that, storage makes a lot of sense. So we've been pursuing those in the markets where that makes the most sense from a commercial perspective. We do also have some other lines of business. You can see those at the bottom. One of the things that makes Invenergy a bit different is that we develop projects, and then some of the projects we own and operate. So Invenergy Services is a different arm of our company that actually operates the wind farms and the solar facilities as an asset for the next 25 years. Invenergy Transmission is a growing part of our company as well. We've done over 1,500 miles of transmission line. We are a privately held company, and so it's a little bit different than a utility, but in other different perspectives, it can be similar. So we do transmission development. That has been a part of my role as well in my past with projects, because not all projects are right next to the lines that you need to put them on. Invenergy is a global company. We have projects and offices around the world, over 180 projects, and that's about $43 billion of transactions. Most of our biggest part of our portfolio, you can see all the dots in the United States. Our headquarters is in Chicago. I did work there for the first 2.5 years that I was at Invenergy, and then moved to our regional office in Denver. We do have a Tokyo office, and we have an office in Mexico City. We have a couple smaller offices throughout the world, and so it makes our development portfolio very diverse. One of the biggest drivers of projects is having someone to buy the power. And historically, the biggest purchaser of power was the electric utility or the electric co-op. And we have very strong partnerships with those utilities across the country. We've got a whole list here that you can see. But one of the things that I think has been really interesting in the last probably 5 to 10 years is the interest in renewables from commercial and industrial customers. And that spans everything from AT&T, who is communications, all the way to McDonald's, where you eat your food. And some of those two are actually two of them that are contracted with the Samson Solar project that I'll be talking about. And so it's really exciting to see these really, your lifestyle, these companies that are investing in renewables and making projects like Samson a reality. Invenergy is very invested in helping and being a part of our communities because of how we develop and the fact that we generally have a long-term presence in the community. It's important for us to be a local partner. And so you can see a lot of the numbers here on how we really focus on veterans, education, emergency services, and environmental stewardship with our giving in our local communities. One of the things that's been really exciting to me, because I did grow up in a rural community, is our partnership with the FFA. That's something that we've pursued in the last year and found that to be a really good way for us to involve ourselves in the education side, but also still supporting the agriculture side of many of the rural communities that we work in. We're also very focused on supporting veterans, and about 10% of our workforce is actually veterans. And so that's a big focus for us, to make sure that we're supporting the people who have served our country. And I think that's something that has been interesting to see grow at our company. We've been really excited about that. So we're going to take it from big picture Invenergy down to Texas And specifically what we've been doing in Texas for the last, many years. Texas has been a big partner in our involvement in renewables. We have 21 projects in Texas. You can see the map, a lot of wind projects in the central and western part of Texas. And then the solar projects northeast of Dallas, there's 5 of them, and they are all tied to the Samson project. And then our natural gas facility that's in Ector County. And so we have quite a bit of investment in Texas. We found it to be a great place to do business and very supportive communities to be able to put these projects and make them a reality. We have over 150 full-time workers who do operations and maintenance on those facilities. Right now, the majority of those are natural gas and wind because the solar projects are under construction. We have 16 Texas counties that host part of our projects, and it's definitely something that we feel would not happen in just any state. Texas is definitely an interesting place to do business. They're very supportive of renewables, and we're glad that we can partner with many of these communities. As I said, solar is becoming a bigger part of our portfolio because of many of the improvements that have been made in the technology. It's starting to make more and more sense to have that work on a just economic basis. We've been doing solar since 2012. We have done many different structures to sell the power, and many things that drive this are tied to the technology. And we have a lot of different relationships trying to find the best fit for each project. We have 18 projects contracted, 17 that are operating, and 9 that are in construction. And 3 of those 9 are the ones that are in some of the projects in Northeast Texas. So I'm bringing in a little bit more. So this is more about project development and what my job is and how this works in terms of where do projects end up getting located. And this is, I enjoy my job, and so I might go a little long on this one, so I'm going to try to keep it brief. But there's 3 stages that we try to put things into in project development. Try to think through it this way: is early stage, mid stage, and late stage development. Early stage is a lot of strategy. It's a lot of thinking about the markets, where a project should go, whether that's from a resource perspective, a transmission perspective, or the offtake that we're talking to and where they want to see projects and where we think the markets are going to locate those. And so we call it prospecting. And so it's trying to figure out where the best project can be located to give it the best chance of success. In order to have any project, you have to have land to put it on. There's not a single renewable energy project that exists without somewhere to put it. We work really closely with our local communities and our landowners to make sure that we find a good location where they're supportive and willing to really be a partner long-term with us. And the third piece of that that's really interesting, and you guys probably have some experience more on, at least from what I'm hearing, on the interconnection side from your local utility perspective. If you're doing residential, you're doing it at like a net metering structure, I'm guessing. And so for us, we are interconnecting at the high voltage level. And so when we're at that level, we have to submit requests to the grid to interconnect there. No one gets to go in and just plug into the grid without permission. And so we all have to go into a pool, and they study what the impacts will be of us injecting power at that location. The interconnection for the projects that we're talking about today, they will be interconnected to ERCOT. Many people are very familiar with ERCOT recently. And so that will be where those will interconnect. There's a study process that is over multiple years before you're able to interconnect and have an agreement with the utility on how that will work. That can be a very long lead time in different markets. In Texas, it's not quite as long, but in other markets, it can be up to 5 to 7 years. So that needs to be started early for these projects to be able to move forward. In mid-stage, we start to do the due diligence. And so we think about what problems could come down the line on this project. What do we need to know to make sure that it's working? It's going to be able to be built. So that's everything from environmental surveys to geotechnical surveys where we look at the soil. We do borings, figure out if there's big rocks down there or bedrock that's really shallow, or if it's sandy soil, if we're driving posts in 15 years, are they going to start leaning? And then are we going to have issues with our solar facility? There's a lot of, I've learned way more about dirt than I ever thought I would in my job. And so it's been interesting to learn those things and how that influences, and I think the whole industry is learning that, how that influences how you're able to build these really large scale facilities. Those take time over years to do all these different studies on a site. In terms of how we then use that information, it feeds into our engineering, and it helps us to make sure we're designing a site that is going to last for the long term. And as we talked about in an earlier slide, at this time, we're marketing this to different offtake, utilities, C&I customers, everybody in between that would want to purchase the power. And that's a very key piece to get it contracted before you go to the next stage and the late stage and start investing more money into finalizing and polishing a project, essentially. Stakeholder engagement and permitting are really important pieces that we work very closely with our communities and the people who are involved in the project, the landowners, and make sure that they're in the loop on how the process is going. In late stage development, this is once it's been contracted, and whether it's McDonald's or Ryan Utilities, they have contracted for the power, and then we're able to move forward and say we're going to start contracting this with a construction contractor. We need to finalize the title on the real estate, and then we have to start looking at getting construction financing to get this project into construction. So those are the stages of my job. And the idea is that all these things, they're very clean, we solve all the problems, and then we put it in a box and we tie it with a bow and we hand it off to construction. That's the ideal. As we all know, we live in the real world, and there are many things that pop up throughout this process that we don't expect and we may not see coming. And that's my job. If it was an easy thing to do, I would not have a job. I am a master puzzle person and a master problem solver. As a project developer, I am not the expert in anything. I am the jack of all trades, master of none, but I should be the most knowledgeable on my project. So I bring in an engineer, they do the engineering, someone from finance is a specialist on that. I have a specialist on environmental, and I help coordinate the team, manage the timeline, and make sure that we're moving everything forward. So I do see there's like a little thing blinking up here. Does that mean someone's asking a question? Because I definitely don't want to just keep talking if there's questions here.
No, I believe that's just indicating that it's being recorded.
Oh, okay. Okay. That sounds good. Well, just stop me if there are questions.
April, do you want to take questions during the presentation, or do you want to wait until you're done?
No, we can take questions now.
Okay, there's been a couple of questions that have come in. One relates to, and it's always dangerous to talk about legislation, but Section 13 of SB 3 in the current session of the Texas legislature is attempting to penalize renewables operating in Texas by adding extra requirements around ancillary services and replacement power. The question is, if more utility scale renewable sites include storage, does that help negate the impacts of this type of anti-renewable legislation if it's passed?
That's a good question. I am not the expert in this. I do have folks who help on the legislative side. I think the biggest takeaway here, obviously the winter storm impacted everyone. It impacted all generation sources, including renewables, but I do think that once the information came out, renewables did meet, what they had expected and projected for those times. I do think that they're trying to figure out a lot of different solutions. Storage may be part of that. I am not tracking exactly what technologies are being proposed and, you know, being proposed for implementation here. But it's definitely something we're tracking closely, trying to follow and make sure we understand.
Something more along your line of work is a question about what are the 3 most important factors for siting the solar farm. I assume they're talking about the Samson, and then how much offsite infrastructure work was required, if any.
3 most, big 3. I think landowner engagement is a really big part. If we don't have landowners that are interested in a project, we don't have a project. So that's one of the biggest pieces. The second one is transmission infrastructure. There has to be room on the lines to carry the electricity. I'm not an engineer, so in my mind, it's carried electricity. We all know that's not exactly how it works. But there has to be room. And so that's a really important thing. We do a lot of studies to figure out where on the grid there's room for additional generation to be injected. So that's the second one. And the third one is where there's interest in seeing a project. And that's always very hard to predict, but it's trying to figure out, is Honda going to be looking for a project in ERCOT in the next 3 years? Do we think that one of the utilities is going to come out with an RFP in the next 2 years, 1 year, trying to figure out where they're going to be looking for a project and what traits they're going to be most interested in? And that's always the guessing game. We have an entire team we call origination, that they are monitoring the market on offtake, trying to figure out where the next opportunity will be for these projects. So I work with them very closely to figure out where that could be and try to align it with those other 2 pieces. A lot of other things that influence it, but those are probably the biggest 3 that come to mind for me.
And how much offsite work?
Infrastructure, yeah.
Yep.
I don't think a ton that's assembled. Obviously, we're procuring things, right? Files are coming in on trucks, the modules are coming in, the racking, but most of it is assembled on site in terms of infrastructure that's put together before that. Maybe some of the work on the transformers or the GSU, but that's probably about everything that's done off-site, but definitely not my area of expertise either. Anything specific you were wondering about on that?
That was a question that came in from the membership.
Chat.
Mark Whitty, you asked that question. Any clarification for April?
No, that's good.
Okay. April, I'll have you ask. I'll have another couple questions and then let you keep going on your presentation. How do you work the long-term purchase agreements? You're making a 20 or 30-year plan, and are your buyers buying into that long-term plan?
To a certain extent. They're usually, they can be anywhere from 15 to 25 or 30 years in terms of their power purchase agreement. Depends on the structure, how we structure the pricing, how, what those contracts look like, how long that we're willing to have a risk. There are times when we then contract again. More often than not, we actually then operate as a merchant asset on the grid after the PPA is expired. And so that's a thing that many facilities are actually encountering now, since they've been in, especially wind farms, since they've been built for long enough that their PPAs have rolled off. And so then they're operating as a merchant facility in ERCOT, which is a little bit different than having a power purchase agreement. But that's kind of the general structure. It is important to have that to be able to get it built. And then however long the term is of the PPA before we then, later on are working on functioning a little differently as an asset in the market.
And then what are your minimum, what is the minimum size you target? Do you do it by watts, by acreage, or what other unit do you use for sizing your targets?
Yeah, it's generally by megawatts. We size them, and that depends on what voltage you're looking at. If you are looking at a 69 kV line, that's going to be most likely a smaller project than a 345 kV line. But then the flip side of that is interconnecting to those lines. The smaller one, you won't have maybe as many interconnection costs as the bigger one, but you can inject more power. So it's a trade-off. But a lot of times we're looking at the megawatt size, and there's always a figuring out at what size does it make. Is it not the most economic? Is it 50 megawatts, or is it 300 megawatts, or like Samson, is it 1,310 megawatts, which is a very large project. And so it's definitely, each project is different, many times determined by location, whether we're targeting a massive Samson-sized project or something on a smaller scale. But Invenergy is mainly focused on utility scale, so things that are at, higher voltage levels.
Why don't we let you get back to your presentation?
Okay.
More questions are coming in, and I have a feeling some of them might be answered by your presentation.
Okay, absolutely. Okay, onward here. So this somewhat ties to what we're talking about, what makes a good site. So I pulled these up. These are obviously, anybody can find these on the internet. But the interesting thing is, this is really what, it's maybe a little more precise, but these are the kind of maps that we use too. Everybody has them. You're looking at where the best wind resource is on this map down here in the left, and then where the best solar resource is up in the right. So if you think through this, where would you want to build everything? In the panhandle, right? You want to build, the wind is the best in the panhandle, the solar is the best, maybe a little bit farther south and in the panhandle, but that's where the best resource is. But that's not always the biggest driver. Obviously, there are tons of wind farms in the panhandle of Texas, but also something that we're all seeing is that there's transmission congestion getting that energy to the places that will use it. And one of the things that is a big factor in where you're going to locate. So if you generate it and you can't get it to market, it's not worth much if you're going to get turned off, curtailed by the grid. So you can see on the resource map, if you look at the solar, northeast of Dallas, still good solar resource, but maybe not as good as if you went farther west. But for us, it's on the other side of Dallas, it's on the east side. You're not encountering some of the larger transmission constraints they're seeing from the wind coming out of the panhandle. And it's close enough to the Metroplex that there's enough demand that the electricity has somewhere to be used. That's the very basic version of that. But that's really because I'm not the commercial analytics folks, but it is interesting because it's not always driven by the resource. Because if you think about it, if we all only built stuff where there was the best resource, the only solar would be in the Southwest. It may not even be in Texas. It'd be in Nevada, Utah, But all the people in the United States don't live in Nevada and Utah. You can only move electricity so far unless you have massive transmission infrastructure. So it really does make a difference on the resource, but that's not always the main driver. And it's becoming more common to look, especially with solar. Okay, your solar resource may not be as strong, but you still are able to counter that with the other factors of where you're locating a project. So this kind of helps you understand the thought process we go through figuring out where to locate a site. So we went Invenergy, we went to Texas, and I talked about how I do my job, and then now we're going to cover the Samson Solar Energy Center. I think it's probably the most interesting part of the presentation. This project is located about a 2-hour drive northeast of Dallas. I know this because I drive it a lot from Love Field. So I do travel down to the site quite a bit when there's not a pandemic going on. And the project itself is kind of centered around Cunningham and Bogota, those two smaller towns. When I go, I stay in the Holiday Inn in Paris, if that helps. But in terms of location and geography, this area of Texas we found to be a really great area in terms of landowner reception and having transmission capacity in that area as well with its location and proximity to Dallas. So that's how we ended up here. Obviously, it's interesting because we are pretty close to Oklahoma, actually, but we are still in ERCOT. I was curious where you had folks, because you start to get farther up into Northeast Texas, and you actually switch into a different grid. It's actually not ERCOT anymore. It's the Southwest Power Pool. So there's kind of this interesting division about 2 counties over from where we're at with Samson. But that's just something I find interesting in the state of Texas. It's not all in ERCOT, actually. So the project itself, located in this area, the project is, most of the solar is in Lamar and Red River County. And then we have a transmission line, a 345 kV transmission line that goes south and then goes through Franklin County. And near about Mount Vernon is where we connect to the grid. So this project has, not only the solar, but also a transmission line that moves that power down to the grid so that we can connect it onto the lines that we were targeting because they had some room on them. So Samson itself is, once it's built, it will be the largest solar project. This is the new thing that marketing is saying in the Western Hemisphere. It will be the largest solar project in the United States, and it's looking around with the Western Hemisphere, but it will be 1,310 megawatts of solar energy, and so that's over a gigawatt. That's starting to get into a very large scale that hasn't been done before. We've learned a lot, and I think really Invenergy, with the way that we approach things and have the ability to innovate, we're able to bring something like this to scale. Like I said earlier, these are all at the bottom, the offtake, the contracts that we have that are buying the power. So you see some of your Texas utilities are on there. Texas A&M actually has a portion of the power that they have purchased. And then we have all of our commercial and industrial customers. Yeah. McDonald's, Home Depot, Honda, and so all these different pieces. One of the things they've been saying about the project is renewable power for everyday life. So many aspects of your life can be and are powered by solar, and that's something that we're really proud of with the unique structures we've been able to put in place to make this project happen. The 5 phases of Samson, they have 18,000 acres under lease. That doesn't mean we're using all the 18,000 acres, but it took leasing that much property to put together 1,300 megawatts. All of those projects, by the time they are fully constructed, they will all be producing by the end of 2023. So we have 3 of the projects in construction right now. 2 of them are a little farther along than the third. $1.65 billion is being invested in Northeast Texas. That's across those different counties. That comes with, the labor that we have. It's interesting. It says 400 to 600 jobs created. This slide is actually a little dated because we're actually at this point around 800 people on site, which blows my mind. I was out there a few weeks back, and there are people everywhere. It takes a lot of people to make a project like this happen. And the interesting thing is some of these panels actually take 2 people to move them. And so you just think about the number of people to install some of these pieces. And you guys know, because of the work you had with those panels, to have the microfractures that you're installing, which is really interesting. And I think that kind of helps you guys have a very much more of a touch point than most people I talk to on what it takes to install these types of facilities. $500 million in local investment will be through the tax revenue and the landowner payments over the life of the project. So it is a massive project. It has been a massive effort. We've been developing this project. I've been working on this for the last 3 years of my career. That's actually a pretty fast turnaround for something like this. As a developer, sometimes it can take a little longer than that, even because of the scale and the amount of pieces you have to get put together. I think this project itself is cutting edge and groundbreaking with a lot of just the scale, but combined with the contracts, combined with the fact that it's in a market that is really dynamic and the fact that we are using technology that is growing and changing over time very quickly. Let's see, there we go. So I dialed in a little bit just to show you what this looks like. This map is on everybody's wall who works on Samson. It's usually dialed in with landowners and roads and different things, but this is a general kind of bird's eye view. So you can see the different projects. So Cunningham is labeled down here. I don't know. I don't think you guys can see my mouse. Here, now I have a little red dot. I think that's pretty small. Ooh, there's a big one. Okay, hopefully you can see this. So Cunningham is down here. So we're in the southeast corner of Lamar County. And then Bogota is up here. So it kind of gives you some touch points. It stretches across between those two towns. And we've split this into 5 different project phases. And so you look, we're actually building the blue one first. This is the first one to get modules right now. There's installing modules right now. Been very exciting to get those starting to going on the racking. And then the orange one is the next one. And then the green one's just starting to get roads and grading done right now. The gray and the pink are going to be the last 2 phases that will come be completed. And so down here you can see how they're split out. They're anywhere from 200 megawatts to 310 megawatts. They're structured to match the operation state and the offtake contract size. So they're all just a little bit different in size, but for the most part, I mean, they're on similar timelines. And so we're kind of moving, across the site. The crews, as they finish at one project, they're moving to the next. And so it's keeping everybody very busy. And as I said, the transmission line, there's the 15-mile transmission line leaves Lamar County in the southeast corner and goes down into Franklin County. And it goes to Cliff's Edge of Red River. The thing about the transmission line is it's 15 miles from the edge of the project, so there's actually a high voltage transmission line that connects all 5 projects. So it kind of goes like that. And it connects all 5 of them and brings all the power onto one line, and then it takes it south to where we inject it onto the grid. All of that transmission infrastructure, pulling all the power together, ends up being about 27 miles in total. So it's interesting to me to see how these projects are all being pulled together, because you kind of have these, it's kind of like, you guys see it down at the residential level. What we're doing is we started at the smaller level, 34.5 kV, and then we step it up, and then that one gets stepped up on the transformers, and then it gets put on this high voltage line, and then we put it on the grid, it's really high voltage, and then it comes to Dallas, and then they start stepping it down. So it's an interesting process to see it kind of in reverse when we're on site. Oh, my laser pointers. There we go. So I grabbed a few pictures because pictures are always interesting. These are the ones from a few weeks back where they're installing the modules. One of the things I didn't cover, so we're actually using trackers. It's become much more common in the industry. So they rotate from east to west and follow the sun. And so we're using trackers on these. So you can see they're going to put them on this side, and then they'll put another one on the other side of the tracker.
Hey, April, this
Yeah.
is Michael. Your audio has been a little scratchy through this. We were just wondering, I'm seeing a control that you have one that's like a 360 all around and then one that's more direct. Can you change that setting to see for the more direct, and maybe that'll take away the scratchiness of your audio?
Sorry about that. Hold on, I actually have a headset. Let me put that in. That's better. Use that at work. It just makes me look like an airplane pilot. Hold on.
I apologize. I should have mentioned that earlier.
Okay, can you hear me now? Better?
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, we should have switched earlier. Sorry about that. Okay, well, at least for the questions, I'll have, you guys can hear me better. I don't know where the scratchiness is coming from. Is it, okay.
Maybe the all around setting.
Yeah, might be. I didn't catch that. Okay. Well, I'm glad you caught me. Okay, so the panels, we covered that. I'm actually close to the end here. So you can see this is actually not Samson. This is a different project, but you can see up in the upper left-hand This is what it starts to look like when you get closer to completion with a solar farm of this scale. Over to the top right, you've got the substation that's installing, and we'll actually have 4 substations, project substations, that will gather the electricity and then step it up to go onto the transmission line. And one of the things that is always interesting to folks is how we connect all the pieces before it even gets to the substation, and that's actually your collection. And so the collection is trenched in with these trenching equipment, and so that pulls in everything to collect it, the collection line, and bring it to a centralized source before it goes on to the transmission line and onto the grid. And so now I have good audio just in time for questions. So what questions do you guys have? I wanted to make sure I didn't talk the whole time so that you had time to ask the things that were most interesting to you.
Michael, do you want to take some of these?
Sure. There was a question on if you have, in the state of Texas, since you have a presence here on the project, if you have legislative, a lobby presence in Austin to help move forward, you know, solar projects of this scope.
Yes, we have a lobbyist in Austin who works with us on our wind projects and our solar projects.
I have another question that deals, have you dealt with the Trump anti-solar tariffs, and which are now continued? That's the question, I'm not sure. I guess that's dealing with the acquisition of solar panels that are imported. How do you source your solar panels, and what kind of solar panels are you using primarily?
Yes, the majority of solar panels for most developers are coming out of Asia. So most of them are seeing the tariffs that they put in place. We are using specifically the Longi panels. That's the type that we're using. And those are what we're putting in place on the site, at least for these first 3 phases. I think, you know, every developer is evaluating all the different types. Things are changing quickly. They're getting more efficient. We're also seeing really strange things, pandemic, you know, and then there's canals that are getting clogged up, and, you know, ships are getting stopped. And so the supply chain is a little interesting right now. But we work closely with our suppliers to find the best option for each project. So it depends on which project you're looking at, but that's what we're doing at Samson.
So, I mean, that's the kind of a follow-up to that is that Longi is a monocrystalline solution. Do you use any thin film or a mix, or have you looked at bifacials?
These are actually bifacial panels.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. So this is, I think, we've done a few projects before with bifacials, but this will be probably the largest.
The question for me is, do you have any community solar projects in your portfolio, or do you have any under consideration?
It's a good question. We've had some earlier on that were at a lower voltage that could be closer to community scale. We don't have any in the works right now that I know of, but that's also has been a little bit of a different side of the business that I believe we've been evaluating the potential there. Sometimes that's a bit more kind of a different side of the business. And so we have to figure out whether you focus on what you know and you're good at, or whether you're looking at new business lines. And so it's definitely not out of the question. It's a very, it's a growing part of the industry for sure. But as far as I've been focused much more on this project and been a little bit of a rabbit hole on making sure this works. And so I'm not as aware of what's going on in that space.
So another question also for me, because I come out of the oil and gas industry, was what difficulties did you have with existing oil and gas operations or mineral owners on the lands leased for the solar farms? So
yeah, no,
that's a challenge.
Yes, I mean, you speak as a developer. It is definitely one of the things that is challenging, but also just part of development. We all have to play in the same playground, right? So we got to be able to work together to make sure that all infrastructure projects, whether it's that or it's even other electrical infrastructure. Encore has big transmission lines that go across our projects. So you have to work with the other infrastructure projects, whether that's a pipeline or oil and gas mineral owners. So we work with them. It's something that, you know, you have to make sure that you kind of understand the perspective for them, because if they already have a pipeline across your project, they have the ability to, you got to work together to make sure you find a solution. So especially when you're dealing with pipelines, you want to make sure that you're really closely collaborating to make sure everything's safe, and make sure that we are working and kind of have our design specs approved on both sides. So it's definitely been interesting. We do have some pipelines that go through our projects, and so I've had some experience with that, and just making sure we're crossing them with collection, and we're, you know, crossing with a high voltage transmission line. There's a lot of different pieces moving. You can't really build a project without crossing something, whether it's a road or a transmission line or a pipeline, and you, in Texas, you can't really develop a project without working through the mineral ownership, because of the way that the real estate is divided. So it's always something you deal with, and it's just a part of development, and we work together to make sure that we find a good solution.
Do you commission your own solar panels or solar installations, and then what's their efficiency as far as the production, the DC side to the AC side, you know, getting it to the transmission grid?
I knew I was going to get an engineer on here somewhere. I don't have that number off the top of my head. We do the commissioning on the project as we power the grid. But again, we have contractors, right? Not all of this, they're not necessarily Invenergy employees that are doing all the construction and things like that. We have a general contractor who manages a lot of that. But in terms of evaluating a panel efficiency, we do have a kind of interesting effort that we've done at one of our flagship projects up in Illinois, close to our office. I mean, not close, a few hours outside of Chicago, but and when we looked at different panel technologies and evaluated those efficiency and compared them. And so there's some interesting work being done by the engineering team. Now, I don't have numbers off the top of my head of the efficiency, but one of the things we also do on site that I think helps inform how we project the project will operate, because, you know, you have to go on the information you have, is we put out solar monitoring stations for a few years before the project is built to get an idea of what the resource looks like. It's interesting because they'll like have them and they'll be sitting there and they'll clean one, but not clean the other. So you have an idea of how that will impact the site, whether you're going to have to do module washing or not. It rains enough in Lamar County that it doesn't turn out we actually need to wash them very often. So it's an interesting process to figure out what we're going to expect and make sure that we understand to a very fine degree of detail what that resource looks like.
You raise an interesting question there, and that is, being an engineer, is your modules that you showed us as far as for the design for this area. What did you have the tilt of those modules at? Were they at latitude, and then do they move at all, a tilt during the day to follow the sun or the season?
I'm not sure I understand the latitude part of the question, but I do. You are an engineer, but I do know we have them tracking, but they're single axis trackers.
Single axis.
So, yeah, so we don't have dual axis at this site. I think we have one or two projects that have that. So it doesn't track seasonally. They're going to track east to west the whole time.
Right. Okay. So the latitude is that the design is you get the optimum production, most efficient when solar noon is perpendicular, and the way you find that is the latitude of where the site's located. So like up here it's 32 degrees, so that would be a tilt of 32 degrees, right?
Okay. Yeah.
We have some more questions. Actually, this is a great question, and I hope you can expound on it a little bit. But it's dealing with women in solar, and so and then Invenergy. It's difficult for me.
It's a hard word.
Women's network. You have a women's network, and so can you talk about that? About celebrating women in Samson Solar Energy Center and that?
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite topics. So we, I've been in the industry. I mean, I've been in energy for a long time, but I've been doing development work for 5 years. When I started, there were very few women solar and wind developers. There weren't a lot of us. In the last 5 years, it's grown immensely. It's been really exciting on Samson to see how many women we actually have. And I know there was an article they did from Invenergy about the team of women. And we have everybody from senior management who are making the decisions and doing the strategy down to my level where we're doing implementation. My project manager, we work really closely together. She's a woman. We have women who work on the finance side. We have the leader on the environmental side as a woman. And it's not necessarily that we strategically did that, but when you take a step back, we realized that that was how it had happened. And I think it shows that there's been a big growth of women in the industry, which is really exciting to see. We do have the Invenergy Women's Network at Invenergy. It's a great organization, helps to give everyone a space to come together, work on the ways that we can make our company more diverse and make our company realize some of the things that we need to improve on. I think that the Invenergy Women's Network has been a good resource for me. The other one that I am a big fan of is the Women of Renewable Industries and Sustainable Energy. I've been involved in that since my grad school days, probably one of the ways I got my job. And it's a great network. If any women are on this call, it's a national network that, and men are welcome to join as well. But it's a national network that does some really great work and helps us to expand the amount of women across energy industries. That's what I think is good about RISE. It's across all the different technologies. We've even got electric vehicle folks in that network, which I find really interesting. I learn a lot from those women, and it helps to have a space where you have other women who understand some of the challenges that you face and the ways that you can strategize to overcome some of those and make sure that you're continuing to grow in your career and have aspirations that maybe you might not have thought of. And so I think there's a lot of room for improvement in the industry for sure, but I think there's been a massive level of change in the last 5 years that I've seen. And so it's been really exciting.
Well, we have the link in our chat to your program. You mentioned another program. If there's, we'll try to do some research to link it so it's available to our membership. But if you have an opportunity, you could include it in the chat if you have a link.
Absolutely.
To the second group that you mentioned. We have a comment in regards to North Texas, and we're known for our thunderstorms and our hailstorms. We just had a recent large event in Texas and Oklahoma and everything, and so the question deals with how robust are your solar farms in regards to these types of events.
It's a very good question. I think I'm sending this. Oh, no, but just hold on. Let me send the RISE link before I forget.
Okay.
Multitasking is hard. Okay, so in terms of the weather, you guys have a lot more rain than I think the majority of people realize. They think Texas and they think West Texas because that's where a majority of wind farms are. It's very different in Northeast Texas, a lot more rain. It's made construction really interesting. I have to make sure to take my muck boots every time I go down there. And so it's definitely been muddy, and we've had a lot to deal with that way. But we just have to adjust, right? If we stopped every time it rained, we'd never get the project built. And so it's definitely been interesting. In terms of hail or storms, it doesn't matter where you go, you're gonna have something. So you build in Oklahoma, you're gonna have tornadoes. You build on the coast of Texas, you could have hurricanes. You build somewhere else, you could have earthquakes. There's always going to be some potential for a natural disaster. That's why you have insurance. And I think the panels themselves are more resilient than you would think, but obviously you have softball size hail that's going to do some damage. So there's definitely things that we do to look at that, make sure we have contingency plans for those types of things. I work really closely with the insurance team to make sure that we have the right coverage in case those things happen. You know, we've all seen how natural disasters can really, I mean, that's why they're called once in 100-year events, but they still do happen because every 100 years you're gonna have something. So it's hard, you know, you can't avoid it. There's not, you know, there's no perfect solution or perfect location for a project to avoid all issues.
So I have another question that deals with like mixed use applications. And this is like, agrivoltaics, where agriculture and solar work together. So have you all looked into any of that, or maybe potential projects in the future where you can take advantage of two land uses at the same time?
I think that's something the industry is looking at, right? And I think that it starts to be interesting. Coming from a farm background myself, you definitely want to maximize productivity, but at the end of the day, you also have to protect your investment. You don't necessarily want sheep chewing on wires or zapping themselves or whatever, or and cattle are big and can rub on panels and change things. You got to be careful how you think about it. I think there's a lot of discussion around what that looks like. It starts to, it starts to be something that takes more thought than it might seem like, because of the amount of investment you have in those panels. We do put fence around the facilities. It is a secure facility. And so we have to make sure that we are thinking through any impacts that would have. I think it's definitely something we're considering. We do have a project in Colombia that has sheep, but I think it also has a shepherd. So, there's a different type of structure there to make sure that we're monitoring how that goes. And it's a much smaller facility. I think it might be 20 megawatts or something. So it's definitely a conversation.
Yeah, I think it was not necessarily with animals, but with agricultural, food crops, fruit crops, things like that. So where you actually, you're not having to deal with the damage from animals,
Livestock.
but yeah, from livestock. But then you have to have the access between rows to be able to harvest your crops and things like that. And then you have the shading if you have tall trees, is it just shrubs and things like that. But multi-use is, so yeah, as an engineer, you always want things to do more than one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it can. Hopefully they'll do both things very well, but
yeah, I don't, crops is not one that I've heard much about.
okay.
It would be difficult. You'd have to space things out differently or have different equipment. Like you said, you're not going to be planting corn necessarily or giant trees. But that isn't one I've heard much about. Okay. From our perspective. Obviously, there might be some more in the community solar space.
Yeah, and actually, it's probably a smaller space because 300 to 1,000 acres for a farm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're only going to be able to use a portion of it for the solar. So I have a question regarding, he kind of did, this is, 1.3 gigawatts into 18,000 acres gives about 18 watts per square meter. It seems a lot of land is needed beyond the actual panel area. What accounts for most of the land use? So if it's not being occupied by the solar panels, what's the rest of the land being used for?
It's a good question. So if I had the layout, I could show you the different pieces. When you get to a project this size, you start having to cross other geographical features like floodplains, wetlands, different pieces that aren't buildable but still are needed to be able to connect the projects. And so collection, we bore under some of those features, we trench across certain things. You have roads, you have different pieces where maybe the landowners had an exclusion area, they want it farther from their house or things like that. So a lot of it, and some of that land, so we say 18,000 acres under lease, some of that land will not be used for the solar project at all. It will be released back to the landowner because it was in an area that we couldn't build in. It had some weird type of rock that was going to cause problems. so those types of things are released back to the landowner. The things that are kept sometimes are because they're connecting different pieces. They might not host panels, but they have the transmission line, they have collection line. They allow us to make a contiguous area. That's one of the biggest challenges, is making sure you have it all connected, to make sure you have at least across all things, even if there's a weird bottleneck across a floodplain. And so it makes for an interesting thing. But yes, you are right. It does take quite a bit of land. If you had a project that was smaller and could fit in the middle of any sort of hydrology features or other constraints, you could have one that could be much more dense and could have less acres per megawatt if it wasn't this scale. I don't think you can build, in my personal opinion, I don't think you could do a 1.3 gigawatt facility without having some land that connects different pieces that maybe doesn't host panels, just due to the geography.
Yeah, that raises another question in regards to what was more difficult, the environmental assessments and permitting, or the actual permitting with, say, local communities, the county, the state, as far as the actual construction and getting it approved? What were the pros and cons or the difficulties of each one?
I don't, like, obviously that they're pieces of the puzzle. They're not, I don't know that we had any serious concerns on most of those pieces, and one wasn't necessarily harder than the other. It's part of the due process, making sure that we're meeting all the permit standards and that we're going through that process and getting stakeholders engaged. So we had environmental folks working on that piece, and then from a local community perspective, we had working with the local taxing jurisdictions and working on those pieces to make sure that we're following all of those requirements. And so, yeah, it's almost always a consideration on a project, and something that we just put into our timeline and make sure that we have the resources to address any questions.
Yeah. There's a follow-up question regarding the agrivoltaics, and that is about carbon sequestration as a dual use. Have you all considered that at all?
Not at this point. It hasn't been something that we've really looked at.
Okay. Another question is dealing with your site design. Are they flexible? If a better location, business deal, or demands occur elsewhere, or if business conditions at an existing site go south, can you pack up your tents and move down the road? Or are you kind of stuck in one site for the duration, good or bad? Once you've decided to go ahead with the project, I mean, you're committed, or do you have the flexibility to be able to, if things change for the worse, that you can pick up bags and go down somewhere else?
Interesting. I think really, for the most part, once you are committed, if you've started construction,
Yeah,
you're really kind of in it, and you're sticking around. I think we all know from the last year that things can change. You can have a global pandemic. There's a lot of things that I'm not going to tell you it never happens, but it's very, very rare that we would like pack up and move. Now, I will tell you, in development, in what I do, before it's contracted, before we're starting to build it, that is very much the case. If we have things that start to because those sites are always being evaluated against each other, right? What makes the most sense? We're bidding them. One price is better than the other because one has, sandy soils and you have to drive the piles 20 feet to make them stable. You start to have different components across different sites, whether it's geography or things like that. So that is the point when we start to shift between projects in terms of priorities. But there's not very many times where we just pack up our tents, as they said, and just because it takes a lot of time and investment to develop these projects. Most of the time we want to stick around and make them work.
So I missed a question up here, and it was, you're wholesaling your output power generation to REPs, is it safe to assume that the power output is totally within the ERCOT domain for this
Yes,
project? Yeah.
yes, absolutely. We have an ERCOT interconnection. All of the power from those 5 projects goes to ERCOT. Yep.
Okay, so kind of going back to your slide that you showed your the strategic partners you have with this project, like the city of, was it the city of Denton?
Mm-hmm.
Was
Denton is one
them?
of them. Yep.
So is that a long-term PPA? I mean, what was negotiated there? I mean, that's of interest. They're a municipality, so what's involved with trying to negotiate and put those in place?
So they will tell me I don't get to share that. So that those deals are we keep those very close to the chest. Like those don't go out in press releases. Those are very confidential. So I can't tell you much about them, but we do, partner very closely with utilities. Utilities are a great partner in terms of how they structure what they do. They need power because they serve you guys power. And so, yeah, the utilities that we have, those utilities are all in one of the phases. They're all in one specific phase.
Did you talk with the city of Garland as well?
Yes, Garland is one of them. Mhm.
Okay, I didn't see them on your list.
Yeah, here, let me pull it up again. Where are we at here? Oh, there we go. Yeah, Garland's on here. Yeah, they're GPL.
Oh, okay, GPV.
Garland Power and Light.
Sorry.
Yep. So Bryan, Denton, and Garland, and the Texas A&M as part of that.
So is that with Texas A&M? Did they have a research facility down there regarding energy? Are you kind of working with them on that as well, since they're taking your power?
Not really, not that I've heard of,
Okay.
in terms of my role.
All right. Okay, let's see. Okay, this is an interesting question for a company like yourself that does large land development, but do you think that your company will look at rooftops as a land resource? So say the city of Dallas, you come in and you negotiate and lease down all the rooftops.
I mean, it's a possibility. It's not on my radar. I think the cost to build would be much higher than going through and driving posts into dirt versus getting it on a rooftop. But you guys probably are more experts in rooftop solar than I am. I mean, I kind of feel like I should go on one of your tours or something. So it's an area of the industry that I'm not very familiar with. So they would have to kind of have probably a separate arm of the company to look at that. I think it'd be very different than what I do.
So we have a great question from James Ornstein, and that is about your community outreach. And so, what did you have to do? How many community meetings did you have to have? Local government, town halls, community stakeholder advisory groups, local schools. I mean, what was your strategy and your approach to getting everyone on board, to want to be able to be partners with you in this project in the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a big part of my job. So it all kind of starts with landowners, and sometimes they're landowner groups, sometimes they're individuals who work on their own and negotiate with us. And once we get a project, we start to talk to the county officials, because we have to work with counties on roads. And we're using their roads. We work to make sure that we have a road use agreement where we repair any damage on the county roads. And so that's a big part of our negotiation. Obviously, they are very interested in just what's going on with the project, and but at the end of the day, they also want to make sure that the work that they do on county roads is we're partnering on that. I think the piece that we also start pretty early with is economic development groups, making sure if there's a regional economic development or city economic development, we're talking to them. We work really closely with schools in this area. We have 2 school districts that we cover with our projects, and work really closely with I mean, most of the time it's with counties more than cities because it's in the rural areas where we're putting most of our projects. When we are working with cities, it's more with economic development because of jobs and housing and things like that. And so that's kind of how it comes into play there. We did, you know, we always do landowner meetings. Folks that are in the project together, we try to have construction kickoffs so they know what's coming, what this is going to look like, what they're going to see. I will say the pandemic has put a bit of a damper on the number of meetings I would normally have. Normally we would do, you know, big landowner meetings and we'd all have barbecue and we'd celebrate the projects going into construction and it's all very exciting, do a presentation, but we, you know, kind of had to scale that back, and I met with landowners individually and we sat, you know, 6 or 12 feet across the table from each other to talk through the plan. And so it's a little different this year, unfortunately, but we're able to start to really work closer with folks again in terms of in person. And I think we're always working with local fire departments and, you know, local emergency services, because they always have questions about how this is going to work, right? Because if they get a call about something happening, we got to make sure we're partnered and we have the clear lines of communication. So we work with them. Sometimes we help buy fire trucks or whatever is needed there. So we make a lot of, try to partner on donations that way. So it's all of the above. All the things they put in this question, I can see it, are all part of what we try to engage in. You know, I think there's always more people we can talk to. You know, there's the Rotary Club, or there's like talking to you guys, which I was really excited to have a chance to do. And so there's always more people. What'd you say?
Well, I said we appreciate you being here because
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
it's been in the news, and it's something, you know, I mean, we got to get inside and learn a lot more, and we appreciate you sharing that. And hopefully we'll have you back when you're actually going forward with production going into the line. I have a question dealing with archaeological surveys. You have to conduct those prior to construction. And if you did you discover anything of interest and note?
So those are studies that we keep pretty close to our chest as well. But we do, it is something, they aren't necessarily, when I say that, they're not things that we share publicly, but we do have to do them to be able to finance. No one's going to invest in a project if they don't have that risk figured out. So we do desktop surveys, we do some field surveys, and we try to make sure that we have that checkbox covered. There is always a plan with construction. If something is found, what to do. There's a contingency plan, and that hasn't happened that I know of here, but I know we always have one, and I've heard of it happening on other projects. You find something, everybody takes a breath, you know, steps back, make sure we follow the plan, have the steps in place to address that. So that's kind of how we address it in terms of, but it is a piece. Whoever that is also got a developer mindset here.
So we're gonna ask a request, in that you may be aware that we're the Dallas chapter of Texas, and which is the state chapter for the American Solar Energy Society, based in Boulder, Colorado. And aren't you based down in Colorado now?
Denver, that's where I'm at.
Oh, okay, great. And so what we'd like to know is, could you or would you consider having a video of maybe of the construction site or something like that during construction, or what stage you're in, for our solar tour in October as part of our presentation? We can coordinate that. Mark Whitty is our solar tour coordinator. That'd be fantastic if you could consider that.
Okay.
So we have another question from James dealing with the transmission portion of your presentation. You mentioned transmission. So it's not really dealing with Texas, it's dealing with the concept of the national grid, and what your position is, or if there's been any discussions you're aware of as far as interconnections of ERCOT with the rest of the grid, and what I'm sure you can see the question there as well.
I can now. I figured out how to get people's faces and the chat over there. So, but I feel like there's April as a person, and I feel like I could sit on here and talk with you guys about nerdy things all day. But as Invenergy, transmission is a growing part of our business. If you're interested in kind of learning more about what we're doing, I am by no means an expert, but we are working on the grain belt transmission line that actually goes from western Kansas into Missouri. And so that's probably one of our biggest projects to do that. I don't know of anything doing DC ties, but that's not something I would be necessarily involved in. And I'm looking at the rest of the question, but I mean, the whole idea of a national grid, I think it's really interesting. It's definitely a topic of discussion. I think personally, this is not speaking on behalf of Invenergy, but you know, the grids that we have are generally functional. I think the hardest thing they have is just it's not an easy thing to operate an electricity grid. People think it's really simple, and it's much more complicated than you think. And I almost wonder, you start to have these, if you would nationalize it and there's no boundaries, right? How can you isolate if you need to, right? This personal April, just an idea, right? But yeah, how would you be able to keep it from rolling and doing the rolling blackouts? Or how can you make sure that that's it doesn't just cause issues across the entire sector? These grids, like ERCOT, is actually geographically somewhat small compared to, like, I work in Southwest Power Pool. It goes from part of Texas all the way up to the Dakotas. It's very large geographically, but might have, I don't know the population or the number of megawatts, but it's much more spread out. And so I think the bigger thing that will probably come, rather than a national grid, will be much more transmission investment. Some of these DC ties are going to be part of the discussion, I think, especially in ERCOT because of the winter storm. But I do think it's an interesting discussion, something that I'm following, and everyone in the industry is trying to see kind of where that will go, how we will address these things. The grids have been addressing them for a long time. Texas had the, you know, the CREZ system, the competitive renewable energy zones, which was very innovative. And so that, you know, helped to build the transmission infrastructure to move the wind from West Texas into the load centers. So you guys are already doing those types of things, maybe not at a national connectivity scale, but I think the transmission is a huge piece that's going to grow in importance in the future.
Yeah. I have, are there any other questions from the members and the attendees? I mean, raise your hand, speak up. Well, I have two questions, if you don't mind, April.
Unless they're engineering questions, no more of those.
No, these aren't. Well, actually, no, they're not. So, one deals with workforce development. And so one of the things is that in your, you know, you have an operational component, you have your construction component, which there are a lot of jobs, but operations is a whole different ballgame. And so can you talk a little bit about that and what you're doing with the workforce development in the communities around, how you're supporting that?
I think that's an interesting one. We, you know, from an operations and maintenance perspective, solar has, you know, we're going to have maybe 12 positions, permanent jobs. So obviously not 800 like we're having in construction. It is interesting because you have so many programs right now that train wind technicians. Like, wind technicians are one of the fastest growing jobs in the United States right now. There aren't as many like college programs training solar technicians. We are sometimes seeing, you just end up having to hire people in with a mindset towards technical, or a mindset that can help address these things and train them, because there aren't as many official training programs. And so I think our approach is maybe not as formalized in terms of some of the programs that you guys see maybe on the residential side. I think the industry will get there, but we're not quite there yet. We're still kind of learning what it is people need to know to be able to do this, because I mean, you can imagine the technology is changing so much. So what are the things you need to know to deal with bifacial panels versus these type of panels versus these inverters versus this type of racking. And so I think there's still some learning that the industry is doing to figure out how to train folks across different types of sites. We have had some wind technicians to switch over to solar. We've had some oil and gas folks come into solar. It's just more of a mindset. And honestly, we're just always glad to hire locally because those are folks who are going to most of the time stick around because they have family and they're part of the community.
For the life of me, my second question is now evading me. So in the workforce development, well, when you have an issue on site and you have production shut down, you have 1 or 2 inverters go down, and you have minimum requirements on production. So you must be outsourcing to be able to do that repair in a timely manner. Do you find companies that can meet those needs and obligations that you may have that's on an as needed basis?
That is a very interesting question. And actually one of my favorite people at our company deals with procurement of services like that, or making sure that we have a plan for components that might need to be replaced or repaired. So sometimes we're outsourcing. I will say Invenergy services, that arm of our company, is really growing in terms of being able to address those in-house as much as possible. Obviously, some of the components have to come from the manufacturer, but I think there's a desire to make sure we have an understanding of that and aren't outsourcing everything. I think there's always a component of this that sometimes ties, and I'm speaking outside of my area of expertise, but sometimes ties to warranties that come with the equipment, right? So if you have a warranty for a certain number of years, that then means that inverter manufacturer has to fix it. So there's kind of that component of it in the early stages of the project as well.
Well, so on the residential commercial side of things, which I'm very familiar with, it's usually the installer is committed to work with the manufacturer on warranty issues and things like that. So, your construction installer that's, been selected to do all that, they're usually there for a little bit to help you through those. But what we like, the reason I asked the question is, well, I'm hoping that they're Texas companies and Texas workforce is contributing to supporting your operations in Texas.
Yeah.
I have, let's see, you're getting some accolades for a great presentation.
Thank you.
So I have a question from Eric Pratt, one of our board members, and he's asking, is the 1.3 gigawatt total value a nameplate value of the equipment installed, or is it the expected output from the installation?
That's the nameplate. Yep.
Nameplate. So I know on projects like this, that you usually have some type of guaranteed production that you have to try to meet, and you get penalized if you don't. That's why I kind of asked the other question too, as far as what kind of initiative you go through to make sure you get back up to speed. So I'm going to turn this back over to Rosa and for closing out. And I do want to thank you, April. It's a fantastic presentation, and we hope you become part of our tour this year.
Yes, let's stay in touch. I'll talk to our comms team and see what we have in terms of coming up, for the different videos and things like that.
All right, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you, April, so much. Let's everybody give a great round of applause to April. We truly enjoyed it. It was very informative, and everybody got a great deal of information from it. Thank you, April. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. I didn't know that this icon was a thing, but I see it.
It is. Just a reminder, our next monthly meeting is on June 12th, second Saturday of the month, April, if you want to join us. We also do have archived all of our presentations, especially the ones by video that we've been doing since this pandemic hit. But we have archives from previous presentations from prior years. I think we have the last 10 years on our website. Very informative as well. As you all know, Emery Lovins from RMI is going to be our speaker in June, and we're thrilled as well that he's coming to speak to us and make a great present. I'm sure you know who he is.
I do. I've actually heard him speak, and he signed my Reinventing Fire book, and I just about died.
Oh, wow. So, well, join us next month.
Yeah,
Become a member.
become a
Support it.
member. That's right. Thank you to all our members and all our participants today. And we will see you on June 12th again. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
See
Bye,
everyone.
guys.
Bye.
Thank you, April.
You're
again.
welcome. Great to
Great
meet you all.
presentation.
Thank you, April.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Can the board hang on long enough to talk about MailChimp?
Up to Rosa.
Well, I don't know who's left. I know Lisa's gone. Joella's gone.
Everyone.
Let me see who's left.
Kathy Thompson, it's nice to see you, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
Thanks for joining us in the questions today. And Jim Phillips, it's good to see him.
I think that Eric is here.
I don't think we have enough members of the board.
We don't have enough members, Melon.
We don't need a quorum. I just want to discuss a general